I could go find you a couple hundred software developers that I could deploy into helping you out. I would be hard pressed in that week to find one controls engineer that I could say, hey, he can go in there and do that job.
Welcome to Hired the Podcast. I'm Travis Miller, and today, happy to be joined by James Butler. James is the founder of Bridger Automation. James's story starts in the electrical trades and winds through years of hands-on work in automation before launching his own company and doing it all while becoming a new dad. He's grown Bridger Automation from 0 to 7 figures in its first year, handling controls and electrical integration for major warehouse projects nationwide. Going to dig deep into his leap from employee to entrepreneur, what's changing in automation hiring, and how he's built a company culture rooted in hard work, communication, and the great outdoors. James, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me, Travis.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, my first question is, other than your role as founder and CEO of Bridger Automation, what's been the best job you ever had?
The best job I've ever had would probably be the last job that I had prior to starting Bridger Automation and becoming the president here. And the reason that is, it was a company called Pendant Automation, and I worked there for almost 10 years. And when I started there, I'd say I was a young boy. And when I left there, I felt like I was a man. And I kind of found what I love to do in life, right? As you kind of mentioned, I love the outdoors, but as my profession, I love working in the warehouse automation space. And I found that when I was at that company. And part of my growth there wasn't just about, going from electrician to a controls engineer. I also learned so much about the business side of things. And, I'll be forever grateful for that opportunity and what I learned there. And that really set me up to have early success at Bridger Automation.
Take me back to the early days. The early days as an electrician. When did automation really start to click for you, and what was that transition and journey like?
Yep. So for me, I was just a standard electrician that did commercial projects, right? And I was working in hotels, and I was working in schools, and I would see at that time the fire alarm programmer come in. And, he'd have his nice desk set up for him. He'd come in, he'd set his laptop up, he'd plug in, do his programming. And that was something that really interested me. And, so I started digging around a little bit and trying to figure out, at that point, I wanted to be a fire alarm programmer. I didn't really know the different directions that you could go. And so I started reaching out to people and trying to figure out how to become a programmer. Well, then I heard about these things called PLCs. And I started finding companies that, were looking for PLC programmers. But obviously at that point, I had no experience. So one of the companies, and it was actually the company I worked at prior to starting Bridger, the founder over there told me, hey, go buy a Click PLC, which is a brand that Automation Direct carries, very cost effective and great to learn on. And so I went and bought one, and I started messing around with it in my basement. And, over a year period, it was something I would do for fun, just, learning how to program, hey, if I hit the start button, the green light comes on and it stays on. And when I hit the red stop button, the green light goes off, or throwing in variations into that. Hey, when you hit the start button, the green light flashes at a 1 second interval. And then when you hit the red button, it stops completely. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And that's really where my interest started to peak and where I began this PLC journey.
Huh, interesting. So what skills, other than that natural curiosity, helped you make the leap from tradesman to technologist?
I think really the electrical background helped me a lot in those early days, right? Because to be a good PLC guy, you can't just understand how to program the PLC. You have to understand how those sensors and devices are actually wired back to the PLC. And I didn't have that all figured out early on, but once I started learning, it really helped me out. And I think that that even helps me be a good PLC programmer too today, right? When I'm, as the president of Bridger going to help out or do a job that we're, handling for a customer and we have an issue with a sensor. Hey, being able to work through that instead of being like, hey, I'm a programmer, you're the electrician, go figure it out. Well, my background allows me to help out with that and, give a lending hand.
And what was the impetus at such a wild time in your life to go out and push you over the edge to say, I'm ready to hang my own shingle. I want to go do this on my own?
Well, it was something that I've always wanted to do. Uh, you know, my dad kind of always instilled in me that, you should try to work for yourself. And it was just something that was always in the back of my mind. And, you know, at that point, it was just, hey, I'm getting up there in age, right? I'm 31 now. I was 30 at the time that I started Bridger, and I was like, hey, it's time to make the jump. And now I think you mentioned that I'm a dad now. Well, that happened after I started Bridger, right? So 2 weeks after I started Bridger Automation and decided that's what I was doing, and even put in my resignation at my last company, I found out that my wife is pregnant. And so, you know, if everything happens for a reason, it was supposed to happen in that order, right? Because if I would have found out that my wife is pregnant prior to that, who knows what would have happened? I might not have made the jump.
Mm-hmm. What's been the biggest shock or surprise for you as the owner of your own business?
So the biggest shock and surprise for me is all of the background stuff related to HR, accounting, and banking. Right. So and the hiring of people, right? So the HR aspect of like, hey, when you do hire somebody, these are all the things that have to happen in the background to make it so that you're legally hiring them and doing the right things, with whether it's, withholding taxes and unemployment and things like that. Because, before I kind of handled everything from project start to project finish, right? So I was part of the inception of it, whether it was quoting or helping design, to turning the keys over to the end user and saying, see you later, call us if you have an issue. And I never really did get into the process after we decide who we're going to hire, what happens after that in the background. Going and getting lines of credit and working with our vendors to establish that so that, hey, when I get an order in, I don't have to send you a check immediately to get my parts. You'll send them to me, and then, I have net 30 terms, right? So dealing with all that has been something that I've definitely had to learn and has been a struggle, but, we're figuring it out as we go.
Who helped you? How'd you figure out all of the back office, HR, legal implication stuff that nobody ever teaches you?
Well, to be honest, I'm probably pretty fortunate, but I use ChatGPT for just about everything. Any question that I have, that's the first place I go to, right? And I'll talk with it back and forth, honestly, and it'll give me at least a good idea. And then if I still have questions, and typically even if I don't have questions, if it's about bringing somebody on and all the accounts I have to have set up with the state of Maryland to, for the withholdings, I'll go talk to my tax lady. Or if it's a subcontractor agreement I'm going to be signing with one of my customers, I'll actually have ChatGPT review it, give me some points, but then I'll also have my lawyer look at it. And, that's kind of the learning process. And I've learned a lot doing it that way. And, I haven't learned everything. There's going to be tons of stuff that keeps coming up, but I think it's been helpful and has been a good way to go so far.
How much hiring were you involved in before you started your own company?
I was pretty involved with hiring, right? And so I would put out campaigns to help find people that we wanted to hire, whether it was project managers or controls engineers. And, I would go through the candidates, have interviews and be a part of the final decision of who we were going to bring on.
What's been the biggest difference between being part of a team and helping hire for your employer versus hiring and you're the one writing the checks?
I'd say the biggest difference for me is that as an employee hiring, you don't really, you obviously don't want to hire the wrong person, right? Because that makes your life easier. If you get the right guy as the manager who that, employee will be working under, they can make your life easier. But now as the owner of the company, I want to make sure I get the right guy, for the fact that if I go spend the next 6 months training him and he ends up being the wrong guy, well, I just spent 6 months of wages, on the wrong guy. And now I have to go spend 6 months more on hopefully the right guy. And I'm really still trying to figure out the process, right? And I always think about Chick-fil-A, and you've probably heard other people say it, but when you go to Chick-fil-A, like, they have the best employees anywhere I go, right? They're always so awesome. They treat you right. And I'm trying to nail down how exactly do they do that, right? Because those are the types of people that we want to bring on here at Bridger Automation.
And you got to ask how much of that is, nature versus nurture. How much is it that they're hiring the right people or training the right people the right way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, training is definitely a huge part of what Chick-fil-A does. And I have, my wife's cousin, he actually worked there. So he wasn't like high up there, but I'm like drilling him with questions. How do they make every person say, thank you so much, or whatever? I forget the term that they use there, but I'm like, how do they get everybody to be so aligned and be so awesome at what they're doing? Right. Because I really want that to be part of the culture here and what we're doing.
Did he give you a good answer?
Not really. He said we have a lot of training documents and things like that. And, one thing he did say is, and this is definitely something that I probably could work on, is he said they're strict, right? So if you come into work and you aren't following the dress code, you get written up. If you come in again and you aren't following the dress code, you get written up a second time. And then the third time they fire you. Right. And so they are strict. And that's probably, I'd say, in my management experience in my past, I'm probably not the most strict manager. And I don't want to be, but I think sometimes you have to draw a line and be able to, hold people to certain expectations.
Yeah, it's a challenge for small businesses, I think. Businesses like ours, because at a large company like Chick-fil-A or Rockwell or Siemens or ABB, there's always people applying, and there's always people coming and going. There's people resigning. There's people retiring, and you are able to, I think, be stricter with policies. Like, it's policy. You didn't follow the dress code 3 times. You're gone. I'm sorry. That's the policy. You didn't hit your numbers 2 quarters in a row. I'm sorry. You're gone. It's policy. I can't do anything about it. Versus you and I, intimately involved in these people's lives, and you see the things happening behind the scenes that may be causing these challenges. You get to know hear about the doctor's appointments and the family challenges and why people are missing significant time, or the challenges to make their sales numbers or complete their projects on time. And I struggle with it myself. How do you cope with the need to combine your empathy and understanding with your need to run a business that's profitable, not only for you, but the people who are counting on you to continue to supply employment?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And that's stuff that I have an issue with, myself, right? It's like, I feel like the people that come on, like, they're not just an employee to me, like, they're my family at that point. Like, we're together for it, and we're all fighting for the same goal. So I definitely can be like, oh man, I know what you're going through at home, and I think really the thing that can maybe get past that is like being able to show people that, hey, what you're doing is important. The reason that's important is this. And if we're not doing this, well, then our customers aren't going to be happy. And if our customers aren't happy, then we're not going to be bringing cash in, and this whole thing falls apart at that point. Right. And if you're able to deliver and instill why those small things can be important, not even just the small ones, the big ones too, and get everybody aligned towards that goal, that can be helpful.
How do you tell your story to a new employee? You don't have a significant track record of success. I'm sure that the vision and future is, despite any efforts, is still a little murky. It's unproven. How do you sell your story, your mission, your vision to somebody enough to get them to say, yeah, James and Bridger Automation are the place I'm going to call my work home. I'm making this bet for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually am having this same, or not the same, but this issue, bringing on somebody that I really want to hire. He's the guy. He's got the right attitude. He's awesome. He bought the Click PLC, right? And he's doing it at his house, but he's scared to come on because of the size of Bridger, and he wants like long-term comfort. And how do I sell it? I tell him my story and how I got here. And I tell him I didn't get here by not taking a risk, right? That when I went to the company that I worked at before, I worked at a well-established electrical company, and I left there to take a risk at a smaller size company. And for me, it paid off, not for the fact that, now I own Bridger Automation, but the work that I did at that company, I really loved it. I was a part of a team there. I was a part of the growth there, and I thought that was really fun. So I kind of try to tell everybody about the ride that I have been on, since I was 21 years old to now, and, sell them on, hey, that could be you, right? You're coming into Bridger at the time that I went into that company, and, who knows what will be in 10 years from now. If you come on, I want you to work here forever, obviously, like you're my family, like I just said, but you could learn so much about business, and, in 10 years, maybe you start your own company doing something as well. And, I want you to grow professionally and personally when you work here. I want you to be successful as a man, a husband, father, as well as a controls engineer or whatever role you're playing here at Bridger Automation.
I think there's such a fine line and empathetic understanding in great leaders to want people to work at your company for their entire career, but to also acknowledge and be aware that your company for the rest of time is not the best place for everybody and their career, no matter what. I remember, this is 10 years ago now, I tried to recruit a guy for a job. And he said, "No, thanks, Trav. I appreciate it, but that's the job I was doing 10 or 15 years ago. I'm the old fart. I'm way overqualified for that. But let me get you the names and numbers of some of the people on my team who I think might be a good fit for this role." And I paused him and I said, "Wait, you mean people who used to be on your team?" He goes, "No, I know that everybody that works for me isn't going to work for me forever. You did a good job selling me on the opportunity. It could be a good fit for some of the people here on my team." And I'll tell you, I was not able to recruit any of those people. With a leader like that supports them that much, they weren't going anywhere.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. And that's a good perspective to have. Like, of course, you want them to work for you forever, right? But you can't control them, and you want what's best for them. So if they see another opportunity that is better for them and fits what they're looking for in life, then, I want them to do that because I want the best for them.
It's so healthy. It's so healthy. So you've been running Bridger for a little over a year now. In hindsight, any big mistakes that you made or anything you wish you would have done differently as you were starting it?
I would say the number one thing that I wish I would have done differently when I started is probably have a little bit more capital at the beginning. And I was able to, get some contracts that helped out with that. But, and the reason is hiring guys when you don't have capital is like the scariest thing in the world, because if you don't have, money in the bank, sitting there ready to pay them, or you don't have the work, what are you going to do? You have to make sure those guys are getting paid. So having that would just be a nice safety cushion. And that was, kind of my biggest fear when I went out on my own. And for a while, I kind of ran a solo thing, right? It was just me doing different, projects, whether it was service calls or, I found a company that needs some help on a startup, on one of their conveyor systems. And I did that. But but really I would have liked to say, hey, I have all this money. I'm going to hire this team immediately and we're going to go out and sell our idea. That would have been probably a little bit better than how it went.
Well, I would say a few more or a few less sleepless nights, but you got a 1-year-old. There are no such thing as sleepless nights.
Yeah, right. That's the truth. Some nights we get lucky, but not often.
Yeah, well, those are the nights you're traveling.
Yeah, right. Don't tell my wife that.
What's been the biggest challenge there? Starting a new business while also being a first-time brand new dad.
So probably the biggest challenge is the split time with my wife, right? Because she owns 2 companies as well. She does like wedding photography and videography, and then she has a company where she rents, furniture or goblets and backdrops to people for their wedding. So we've really had a fight for time. I go on a week-long work trip, and then I have something else, and she's like, "How you have to go on another trip? I have to do stuff for my company too. How am I going to have time to do any of this?" So really we've been working on it, and communication is the number one thing I think that, gets you through that. I'm not very good at that, I'd say. She's much better than I am. So we're working on it though. And then really in our industry, I've done 5 projects that are within an hour of my house in the past 10 years. It's always traveling to California, traveling to Las Vegas, whatever big city or even small cities across the country. So it is a travel intensive job. And that's kind of what I signed up for, though. I don't necessarily like the travel part, but I like the work. So this is where it takes me. It takes me to other cities across the country. And, I've gotten to do a lot of fun stuff because I travel for work. And, we're going through a tough period now, but in the future, it'll probably be pretty cool because, hey, she's 2 or 3 years old. I'm doing a job in, Las Vegas. I'll fly the family out for a weekend and we'll go up to, Zion National Park in Utah, things like that. So we're just trying to make it through right now, though. And we're managing.
Yeah. Yep. I remember that. Whew, that first year, even the first for us, the first 2.5, 3 years, those are tough. But the moment they kind of become a sentient person, it just changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we just hit 1 year, right? She was born on October 29th. And, so she's a couple weeks past 1 year. We're still going through it. And I think we're going to still be going through it for the foreseeable future. But you just got to keep going and communicate and work together and know that it's never going to be perfect. We just, keep our heads down and doing what we're doing.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier. And that's the difference between hiring as an employee versus hiring as the employer. But I want to talk about the difference in your strategy. Has it changed at all what you're looking for in individuals, in people, how you interview them, how you hire them, and what you expect of them once they're on board?
Yeah, so I'd say what I'm looking for in a person and what I expect once they come on board has not changed too much. In the current state of the company, I'm not looking to hire any guys who have been doing this for 30 years and, have a well-established resume. I'm looking to really bring in some younger guys who really want to hit the ground running. They have that curiosity. And the goal is they come in and they're not super experienced. Maybe they have a little bit of experience and I'm able to train them into what we need them to be. And then, at some point they're able to start going out on jobs on their own and completing those jobs. And I'm able to sit back a little bit more and, reach out and help them as needed. The expectations will still be the same, right? It's ultimately about communicating with the customer and being a good person really are the two number one and two things that I look for in a person is good communication and being a good person. And I think there's always going to be hiccups in projects. Nothing's ever going to go perfect, in the first run, but it's how do you overcome that, right? Hey, man, we saw this issue. It occurred at this 2-to-1 merge over here. We're working on that now. We're just working through some of the issues we saw versus, some other guy might just, hey, I don't even care. I'm not too worried about that, right? It's all about how you communicate with the customer and showing that you care, right? And kind of one thing that you hinted at, and this isn't a huge thing, but somebody who cares about the outdoors, right? Because that's somebody that I'm looking for now. They don't have to be super into it like I am, but one of the initiatives of our company is giving back to the outdoors, whether it's donating to the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership or, donating to some local wildlife agency or, even spending time, going out and helping Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation do some fence work out in Colorado. And that's kind of part of the brand I'm trying to build. So I want people to kind of care about that. And, hey, our goal isn't just to do a ton of conveyor projects. It's to help wildlife along the way.
I've seen you reference Teddy Roosevelt a number of times in some of your social media posts. How did he become kind of a go-to figure for you?
So, he kind of was the founder of national parks, right? And in today's world, we have kind of a battle over public lands and things like that. And I'm a big believer in public lands. I don't own 1,000-acre ranches or 1,000-acre farms here in Maryland. So I spend a lot of time in the outdoors. I'll go on trips to Montana and Colorado and, go on public lands, on hunting trips. And so him being kind of the founder of the public land mindset, he's somebody that, what he's done is something that I want to protect and be a part of.
So you said the ability to communicate with customers, being a good person, and curiosity are some of the most important things that you look for. I'm pretty skilled at interviewing for good communication. If somebody can talk to you, they most likely have that skill. But the other two are tougher. How do you interview for curiosity, and how on earth do you interview to try and uncover in just a couple hours, a couple conversations, if someone's a good person?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the good person can just be kind of like the back and forth when you're talking to them. And really like the vibe you get off them, right? Like I feel like every person has energy and you're able to kind of feel it when you're with them. Now you're not always going to hit 100% when you're going off a vibe or a feeling, but I don't know that you can ever, mine and data mine and get that information on if they're a good person. You kind of just are throwing a dart and hoping your gut was right. Now the curiosity, that one that I have always kind of asked people is like, what do you do for fun? Or like, what's your best? If you could do anything on a Sunday, what does your Sunday look like? And if they're like, oh, my best Sunday, I'm gonna wake up at 11 a.m. and I'm gonna sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook or, something like that. It's obviously they probably aren't going to say that in an interview, but like doing absolutely nothing on a Sunday, that's what I'm going to do. And that's my best Sunday. That kind of like makes me think, well, what do you do for fun? And if you're like, oh, for fun, man, I'm into drones. I like flying them around. I'll take them up to the state park and I'll go take pictures of wildlife or, get pictures of people there and get their information and send it out. Like, I feel like that question can inform me on, what's your curiosity, not just about what we do, but just about things in general.
Well, now I got to know, what's your best Sunday?
My best Sunday?
Yeah.
My best Sunday would be waking up at 5 a.m., going out, and it'd be November, the first week of November. It's the white-tailed deer rut. You go out there, you shoot a nice big buck. You had a great experience out there. The sun came up, the woods woke up, and you got a real nice one. And then you come home, you got your wife and kids there. You have a good breakfast with them, and you spend the rest of the day, going outside, hanging out, and maybe shoot some bows with the family, but spending it outside with family and getting a little bit of hunting. I could take fishing too. I'd be okay with that as well.
I hope you don't have a bow for your 1-year-old yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been talking about it, but the wife isn't thrilled.
So as we're finishing up here, James, my last big question for you is, as you look into your crystal ball, what do you see as the landscape for hiring and for our industry over the next couple of years?
So one thing that I think in our industry is that specifically controls engineers, and this is my crystal ball, this is what I think could happen. I think controls engineers are underpaid. You go look at software guys, and software guys, they're making, you know, $200,000, $300,000, like insane dollar amounts at some of these companies that they're working at. Now, granted, they're doing a lot of crazy stuff, but if you told me, hey, I want you to go find a software developer that I can deploy into my company that can do WCS software for warehouse automation, and you have 1 week to do it. And I also need you to find a controls engineer that can come in and he can, he can come in and he can program an entire conveyor system, shoe sorters, high speed merging, scanning, print and apply, and do all the communications back to the WCS. I could go find you a couple hundred software developers that I could deploy into helping you out. I would be hard pressed in that week to find one controls engineer that I could say, hey, he can go in there and do that job. And that's just kind of what I've seen happening over the years. I've worked with software guys. I've worked with a lot of controls guys, and I think the controls guys are hard to find. And I think there's a lot of pressure on finding good ones. And I think with all this AI, you might see some software guys coming over. I don't know, but I think that the controls guys might be getting a pay boost. But that would be my crystal ball, and I might have a soft spot for controls guys as well. In the industry itself, for where we might be headed in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see a lot less of these like massive $50 million conveyor systems, and there's going to be more of the smaller, I would call them Hyundai conveyor systems, where hey, you can get, maybe a company's getting their first conveyor, and they're looking to spend below 100,000, and we're putting in a small sorter where they can roll it around on wheels, and they can sort boxes to one of 3 lanes, and it has UPS, FedEx, and USPS. And I think that is where the industry will be in 10 years. Me and my buddy, we call it micro fulfillment. I think that's going to be a really big thing.
More automation at companies that aren't currently utilizing it.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Like I think how big can it, I say, how big can Amazon get? I buy Amazon stuff every day just because of the convenience of it. But I think there's going to be a window for some of these smaller companies to get their first conveyor system. And obviously they're not going to be spending $50 million, $10 million. They're going to be looking for a cost-effective solution that gets them going.
Yeah. And last question, back to the controls engineers. What can the industry do as a whole to support the next generation and the generation after that of controls engineers? Because there's not as many controls engineers as there are software engineers coming out of school. And we know we've got a big demand for it. How do we help make more of them?
I mean, I think this one would be beyond anything I could do. This would be a nationwide effort, but like nobody goes to school and they come out and they're like, hey, I have a controls engineering degree, right? A lot of people do computer science, software engineering, right? Controls engineer, a lot of people don't even know what it is when they're in school. And so I think, maybe opening up and creating some type of degree that's specialized on, PLC programming and robotics programming, motion controls and things like that would be definitely beneficial. And I think that would be probably the number one thing, but that's a nationwide effort. Like, how do you make something like that happen? I don't know that I could be the one to do it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to go talk to Jeff Bernstein at A3 and see what he's got to say.
Yeah, right.
James, this has been great. Really appreciate it. Who are the people that should be reaching out to you, and what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah. So, I mean, people that should be reaching out to me would be really anybody that's a controls engineer working in warehouse automation. Doesn't have to be, maybe you want to make the jump to warehouse automation. Project managers that, have experience working in the warehouse automation space, electricians, and those are going to be people that would come onto the team at Bridger Automation. But then, integrators who are, selling conveyor projects and are looking for a controls house that can be there for them every step of the way and deliver a good product for their end user is who should be reaching out to us. And anybody can find me on LinkedIn, James Butler. You'll see me. I got my arms crossed and the same hat on. And, you can also reach out to me at the letter J, Butler, Butler, at bridgerautomation.com, or even give me a call at 443-903-6101.
All right. As the owner, did you design the logo yourself?
I did. Yes, sir.
All right. Love it.
Yep.
James, this has been a pleasure. Big thank you to Noah Cuff, our producer, as always. This has been Hired the Podcast. Talk to y'all soon.
I appreciate it. Have a good one, fellas.